So, Emma, I moved my desk last week. Sounds trivial, right? But I've been tracking my focus sessions and something genuinely shifted, which got me thinking, how much of our productivity struggle is actually just fighting our own biology?
That's where the research is pointing. We spend so much energy on willpower and discipline. But what if the real leverage is in designing an environment and routine that works with our circadian rhythms instead of against them? I've been diving into the neuroscience behind this, and it's kind of mind-blowing.
Okay, so today we're building a complete daily operating system for the office. Not just random productivity hacks, but an integrated approach from the moment you sit down to the moment you actually disconnect at the end of the day.
How to set up your morning for peak cognitive performance, why those constant interruptions are costing you way more than you think, and how to work with your afternoon energy dip instead of fighting it.
Plus, we're getting into something I was initially skeptical about, using AI to handle the draining stuff without turning yourself into a passive observer of your own work. There's a balance there that actually matters.
And we'll close with what might be the most underrated part of the whole system, how to actually shut down at the end of the day so your brain stops spinning and you can show up fresh tomorrow. Because sustainable productivity isn't about squeezing more out of every hour. It's about doing the right things at the right times in the right conditions. All right, let's start at the beginning with what happens the moment you walk into your workspace.
So here's something I tested last month that completely changed my mornings. I moved my desk to an east-facing window. Sounds simple, right? But the data on what happened to my focus between 9 a.m. and noon was honestly shocking.
Wait, you literally just moved your desk. That's it.
That's it. But here's why it matters. Your body has this thing called the Cortisol Awakening Response, CAR for short. Within 30 to 45 minutes of waking up, your cortisol spikes naturally. It's your biological alarm clock. But here's the catch. That spike needs to be triggered and reinforced by bright light, specifically blue-enriched light from the sun.
And most of us are getting to the office after that window closes, sitting under fluorescent lights that are doing absolutely nothing for our circadian rhythm.
Precisely. So I started tracking this. I used a light meter app on my phone, free by the way, and measured the lux levels at different spots in my office. My old desk, 200 lux on a good day. The east-facing window spot, 1,000 to 2,000 lux in the morning. That's the difference between your body thinking it's twilight versus actual daytime.
And this isn't just about feeling more awake. There's actual research showing that office workers with optimized natural light exposure reported an 84% drop in eye strain, headaches, and blurred vision. That's not a small improvement. That's transformative.
Right. And here's where it gets compelling for productivity nerds like us. Research shows most people perform their best analytical work between 9 a.m. and noon. That's your golden window for deep work, complex problem solving, anything that requires serious cognitive horsepower, but only if your biology is actually aligned with that window.
So you're saying the reason I feel like my brain doesn't turn on until 10:30 might not be because I'm not a morning person, it might be because I'm sitting in a cave.
Possibly. Look, I'm not saying everyone's the same, but when I moved my desk, I started noticing I could tackle my hardest problems right at 9 a.m. Before, I'd spend that first hour just warming up, checking emails, doing busy work. Now, I'm writing code, analyzing data, doing the stuff that actually moves the needle.
Okay, but not everyone can just move their desk to a window. What if you're in a cubicle farm or your office doesn't have good natural light?
Great question. This is where you engineer it. First option, if you can get to the office early, even 15 minutes, position yourself near a window for that first hour. Bring your laptop to a conference room with windows. Second option, invest in a light therapy lamp. You want something that delivers at least 10,000 lux and has a color temperature around 5,000 to 6,500 Kelvin. That's the blue-enriched spectrum that signals daytime to your brain.
And the research backs this up. Better lighting in the workplace can increase overall productivity by up to 23%. That's not a marginal gain. That's nearly a quarter of your output potentially being limited by something as simple as where you sit.
I get to my desk by 8:45 a.m. I position myself so the natural light is coming from the side, not directly behind my screen. You don't want glare. Then I do my most cognitively demanding work between 9 and 11:30. After lunch, when my cortisol naturally dips, I switch to warmer light and do more collaborative or administrative tasks.
You mentioned blue-enriched versus warm light. Can you break down when to use each?
Sure. Blue-enriched light, that's your 5,000 to 6,500 Kelvin range, suppresses melatonin and increases alertness. You want this in the morning and early afternoon. Warm light, 2,700 to 3,000 Kelvin, does the opposite. It's what you want in the evening to start winding down. The problem is most offices use the same lighting all day, which is like drinking coffee at 9 p.m. and wondering why you can't sleep.
So if you're working late, you should actually be dimming your screen and switching to warmer light?
Without question. I use F-Look on my computer. It automatically adjusts color temperature based on time of day. On my phone, I have night shift enabled. These are free tools that can genuinely improve your sleep quality, which then feeds back into how well you perform the next morning. This is compelling because we're talking about optimizing your environment, not just your habits. It's not about willpower or discipline, it's about setting up the conditions where your biology naturally performs better. That's the key insight. Your body is already trying to optimize itself. It has these built-in rhythms, cortisol peaks, temperature fluctuations, hormonal cycles. Our job isn't to fight them, it's to align our work environment with them. When you do that, productivity stops feeling like a grind and starts feeling natural. All right, so action items for listeners. Measure your current light exposure. Identify where the natural light is in your office and experiment with positioning yourself there during your peak analytical hours. If that's not possible, look into a light therapy lamp for your desk. And track it. Don't just assume it's working. I kept a simple log for 2 weeks. What time I started deep work, how long I could sustain focus, how I felt at the end of the day. The difference was measurable. That's what made me a believer. But even if you nail your morning light exposure and hit that 9 to noon peak perfectly, there's still this massive productivity leak that most people don't even realize is happening. It's costing you hours every single day, and it has nothing to do with your circadian rhythm.
All right, so we've talked about the morning routine, the workspace setup, but here's where most people's productivity actually dies, the constant interruptions. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like meetings. I'm talking about the invisible productivity killer that everyone thinks is harmless.
The quick check, the just 1 second, the let me see what that notification was. And here's the brutal truth. The average worker is only truly productive for 2 hours and 53 minutes per day. Not 8 hours, not even 4, less than 3 hours of actual deep work.
Wait, hold on. 2 hours and 53 minutes out of an 8-hour workday? That's insane. Where does the rest of the time go?
Switch costs. And this is where it gets really expensive. Every time you check Slack, every time you glance at your email, every time you respond to a ping, you're not just losing those 30 seconds. You're triggering what researchers call the refocusing penalty. It takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully refocus on a task after a single interruption.
23 minutes. So if I'm deep in writing code or analyzing data and someone sends me a quick question on Slack, I'm not losing 2 minutes to answer them. I'm losing 25 minutes total, the answer time plus the refocusing time.
Correct. And most people get interrupted way more than once an hour. If you're checking Slack every 15 minutes, which feels normal, right? You're basically never reaching deep focus at all. You're spending your entire day in that shallow, scattered state where everything takes twice as long.
This is why I've become almost militant about my focus blocks, because the math is devastating. Let's say you get interrupted 6 times in a day. That's not 6 times 2 minutes, that's 6 times 23 minutes. You've just lost over 2 hours of productive time to interruptions that felt like they took 10 minutes total.
And the research backs this up with hard numbers. Multitasking and frequent task switching can reduce overall productivity by up to 40%. 40%? That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between finishing a project in 3 days versus 5 days. So let's get tactical. How do we actually build what you're calling the deep work fortress? Because I know what people are thinking. I can't just ignore Slack all day. I have a job. People need me. Right. And that's the trap. The feeling that you need to be available all the time. But here's what I've tested extensively. The focus mode protocol. It's not about being unavailable. It's about being strategically unavailable in blocks. Here's how it works. I identify my 2 most important deep work tasks for the day. Then I schedule 2 90-minute blocks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. 90 minutes? I thought you mentioned something about a 75-minute work block earlier. Good catch. So there's new research from 2025 that identified an optimal work-rest ratio for top performers, 75 minutes of work followed by 33 minutes of rest. But I found that for deep work specifically, I can push to 90 minutes before I need that break. The key is what happens during those 90 minutes. Total lockdown mode. Complete fortress. Phone goes into another room, not just on silent, physically away from me. Slack gets closed entirely, not just notifications off. Email closed. Browser tabs limited to only what I need for the task. And here's the critical part. I set a visible do not disturb status with a specific return time. Deep work until 11:30 a.m., available after. This manages expectations. I love that you're specific about the return time, because that's what people actually need to know. Not I'm busy, but I'll be available at 11:30. It turns anxiety into a calendar item. Precisely. And during those 90 minutes, I use what I call the batch temptation technique. Every time I feel the urge to check something, and I will, multiple times, I write it down on a notepad. Check if Sarah responded. Look up that article. See what's happening in the team channel. I'm not fighting the urge, I'm just deferring it.
And then at the end of the block, you can batch process all those checks in 5 minutes instead of breaking focus 10 times. Right. And here's what I discovered. About 70% of those urges completely disappear by the time I finish the focus block. They weren't actually important. They were just my brain looking for an escape from hard thinking. That's the addiction talking. We've trained ourselves to reach for the dopamine hit of new information every time we encounter cognitive resistance. The moment the work gets hard, we check Slack. The moment we're stuck on a problem, we refresh email. And breaking that pattern is uncomfortable at first. The first week I tried this, I felt genuine anxiety during my focus blocks, like I was missing something critical. But after 2 weeks, something shifted. I started getting more done in those 2 90-minute blocks than I used to get done in entire days of scattered work. Because you're actually using those 2 hours and 53 minutes of real productivity instead of spreading them across 8 hours of pseudo work. Let's talk about the rest period though. 33 minutes feels very specific. It is. And this is where most people mess up the work-rest cycle. They think rest means scrolling Twitter or checking email. That's not rest. That's just different work. Real rest for your brain means physical movement, ideally outside, actual conversation with a human, not Slack messages, or genuine mental downtime, staring out a window, making coffee slowly, sitting with your thoughts. No screens during rest. That's the rule I've adopted. Because if I'm resting by reading articles or watching YouTube, my brain is still in consumption mode. It's not actually recovering. Correct. And here's the protocol I recommend for most people. Start with just one protected focus block per day, 90 minutes. Pick your most important task, build the fortress around it. Phone away, apps closed, status set. Do that consistently for 2 weeks and track what you accomplish in those blocks versus your normal scattered time. And I'm guessing the results are dramatic enough that people naturally want to add a second block every single time. Because once you experience what it feels like to actually finish something significant in one sitting, you can't go back to the constant interruption model. It's like the difference between trying to fill a bucket with a hose versus trying to fill it with a spray bottle while someone keeps knocking it over. What about the pushback? Because I know some workplaces have this culture of immediate responsiveness. How do you handle the manager who expects you to reply to Slack within 5 minutes? This is where you need to manage up strategically. I've had this conversation with my manager. I've noticed I'm most productive when I can focus without interruption for 90-minute blocks. I'd like to try scheduling 2 of these per day, with clear availability windows in between. During focus time, I'll be unreachable, but I'll be twice as productive. Can we try this for 2 weeks and measure the results? You're framing it as an experiment with measurable outcomes, not a personal preference. Right. And then you deliver. You track what you accomplish in those focus blocks. You show the before and after. Most reasonable managers will support anything that demonstrably increases output. And if they don't, that's valuable information about whether you're in the right workplace. That 40% productivity loss from constant switching, that's not just hurting you, it's hurting your employer. They're paying for 8 hours and getting less than 3 hours of real work. A company that optimizes for the appearance of availability over actual productivity is leaving massive value on the table. And for anyone listening who's thinking, this sounds great, but I could never do this, start smaller. Start with one 30-minute focus block. Phone on silent, Slack snoozed, one task. Just prove to yourself that you can do it, then expand from there. The fortress doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better than the constant siege you're currently under. Even 1 protected hour per day is a massive upgrade from 0 protected hours. And here's what I want people to understand. This isn't about being antisocial or unavailable. It's about being strategically available. I'm more helpful to my team when I can give them my full attention during designated times than when I'm half present all day long. Quality of availability matters more than quantity. Which brings us to something we haven't talked about yet, what you do with all that reclaimed productivity. Because if you're suddenly getting twice as much done in half the time, you've got some interesting choices to make about how to use those extra hours.
Okay, so we've optimized the morning, we've structured our deep work blocks, but then 1:30 p.m. hits, and suddenly you're staring at your screen like it's written in hieroglyphics. Alex, I know you've done some wild experiments with this post-lunch energy crash. What's actually happening in our bodies?
It's compelling because most people think it's just about what they ate for lunch, right? But there's this circadian dip that happens between 1 and 3 p.m. regardless of food. Your core body temperature drops slightly, adenosine builds up in your brain. It's basically your body's way of saying, hey, maybe a nap would be nice. The problem is we're expected to power through it, sitting in a chair, which is literally the worst thing you can do.
So what's the minimum effective intervention here? Because I'm not taking a nap at my desk, and I'm guessing most of our listeners aren't either.
This is where the research gets really compelling. There was a study that found micro breaks, and I mean micro, like 27 seconds, can significantly boost vitality and reduce fatigue. 27 seconds. That's not even enough time to make coffee.
Wait, what are you actually doing in 27 seconds that makes a difference? Because that sounds almost too good to be true.
I was skeptical too, so I tested it for 2 weeks. Stand up, do some shoulder rolls, maybe walk to the window and back. The key is you're breaking the static posture and giving your brain a pattern interrupt. It's not about getting your heart rate up, it's about resetting the system. Think of it like rebooting your computer when it starts lagging.
But there's got to be a difference between a 27-second stand and stretch versus actually moving, right? Because I've seen the research on walking meetings and creativity. Huge difference. The 27-second thing is your baseline. It's better than nothing. But if you can do a 5-minute walk every 30 minutes, you're playing a completely different game. The research shows it helps regulate blood pressure and blood sugar, which directly combats that sitting-induced metabolic slowdown. And here's what sold me. Active breaks with light activity like walking or stretching reduce mental stress without hurting productivity.
Without hurting productivity, that's the key phrase. Because I think a lot of people worry that if they step away, they'll lose their train of thought or momentum.
That's the old industrial mindset talking. Your brain isn't a machine that runs at constant output. I actually found my problem solving got better after implementing what I call movement snacks. Every 30 minutes, I take 5 minutes to move. Sometimes it's walking around the block. Sometimes it's just pacing while thinking through a problem. The ideas that come during those walks are often better than what I was grinding on at my desk. Movement snacks. I love that framing. It makes it feel less like you're interrupting work and more like you're fueling it. But practically speaking, how do you remember to do this every 30 minutes? Because I can see myself getting deep into something and suddenly 3 hours have passed.
I use a simple timer on my phone, nothing fancy. It buzzes every 30 minutes. At first, it felt disruptive, but after about a week, my body started craving those breaks. It's like training yourself to be hungry at certain times. The other thing I do is stack the movement with something I already need to do. Need to think through a problem? Walk. Need to make a phone call? Walk. Need to review notes? Walk.
So you're essentially making movement the default instead of sitting. What about the people who say they can't leave their desk? They're in an open office, they're on video calls all day, whatever the constraint is. Then you optimize for what you can control. Standing desk if possible. If not, you can do desk-based movements. Calf raises while on a call, seated spinal twists. Even just standing up and sitting down 10 times is better than nothing. The goal isn't perfection. It's breaking up the static posture. I've literally done squats during Zoom calls with my camera off.
Okay, but let's talk about the post-lunch dip specifically. Because even with movement breaks, there's still that 2 p.m. wall where your brain feels like it's moving through molasses. What's the protocol there? This is where you need to be strategic about task selection. Between 1 and 3 p.m., I don't try to do my hardest cognitive work. That's when I do my movement-compatible tasks, walking meetings, brainstorming sessions, anything that benefits from a different physical state. If I absolutely have to do focused work during that window, I'll do a longer walk first, like 15 minutes, to get some blood flow going, then tackle it. So you're essentially working with your biology instead of fighting it. What about caffeine? Because I know a lot of people reach for their second or third coffee right around this time. Caffeine can help, but it's a band-aid, not a solution. If you're using it to override the signal your body is sending, you're just borrowing energy from later in the day. I've found that movement is actually more effective than caffeine for the afternoon dip because it addresses the root cause, stagnant blood flow and mental fatigue, rather than just masking the symptoms. Plus, you don't get the 4 p.m. crash that comes with too much afternoon caffeine.
That makes sense. So if someone's listening to this and wants to implement this starting tomorrow, what's the absolute minimum viable version? What's the one thing they should do?
Set a timer for 30 minutes. When it goes off, stand up and move for at least 27 seconds. That's it. Don't overthink it. Don't wait for the perfect system. Just interrupt the sitting. Once that becomes automatic, you can layer in the 5-minute walks, the strategic task placement, all of it. But start with breaking the static posture every 30 minutes.
And I'm guessing this compounds over time? Like, the benefits aren't just immediate energy, there's a longer-term metabolic effect.
Without question, the blood sugar regulation alone is huge for long-term health. But even in the short term, I noticed after 2 weeks of consistent movement snacks that I didn't have the same 3 p.m. energy crash. My baseline energy was higher throughout the day. It's one of those things where the ROI is so obvious once you try it that you can't imagine going back.
Which brings up an intriguing question about the end of the workday. Because if you're maintaining energy better throughout the afternoon, does that change how you approach wrapping up?
All right, so we've made it through the morning sprint, powered through lunch, and now the afternoon. This is where most people's productivity goes to die, right? But here's where I think we're living through the most compelling productivity shift in decades.
The AI revolution. And I have to say, the data here is genuinely wild. We're talking about a 33% productivity boost in each hour that workers use generative AI for tasks like document summarization or drafting. That's not marginal, that's transformative.
Okay, but let's get specific. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I think most people hear AI and either think it's overhyped or they're using ChatGPT to write one email and calling it a day.
Right, so let me paint the picture of what I call the agent boss mindset. The average worker receives 117 emails daily, 117. And get this, 40% of people are checking them as early as 6 a.m., which we already know is a terrible idea for deep work.
So instead of being reactive to that flood, you're treating AI like your chief of staff.
Precisely. I've been testing this for 3 months now. Every afternoon at 2 p.m., I have a specific AI workflow. First pass, AI categorizes all emails into requires decision, informational only, and can be delegated or ignored. Second pass, it drafts responses to anything routine, meeting confirmations, status updates, simple questions. I review and send. Third pass, it summarizes any long email threads or documents into bullet points.
And this is where that 33% productivity gain actually shows up. You're not spending cognitive energy on the low-value stuff during your lowest energy hours. Correct. But here's what's compelling, and this is where people mess up. You can't just throw AI at everything and expect magic. There's actually a motivation trap here.
Oh, I want to hear this. Because I've noticed something weird in my own experiments. When I automate too much, I get bored?
Yes, the research backs this up. When employees who'd been using AI returned to work without AI assistance, they reported an 11% drop in motivation and a 20% rise in boredom. At first, I thought, wait, shouldn't they be happy to have their tools back? But it's the opposite problem. They got dependent on it. Not just dependent, they lost the sense of accomplishment. If AI is doing all your thinking, even the mundane thinking, you stop feeling like you're contributing. It's like, imagine if a video game played itself. Technically efficient, but completely unsatisfying.
Use AI for the stuff that drains you without teaching you anything. Email triage? Perfect. Document summarization? Great. But the actual decision-making, the creative problem-solving, the stuff that makes you feel like you accomplished something, that stays human. AI handles the shallow work, and this is where batching comes in, because if you're going to use AI effectively, you need to batch these tasks together rather than context switching all day. Okay, so talk to me about batching, because I know there's actual data on when people are doing this stuff. Yes, so here's a compelling pattern. Tuesdays carry the heaviest meeting load. 23% of all meetings happen on Tuesdays. Fridays are the lightest at 16%. What does this tell us? That everyone's trying to get meetings done early in the week? Right, but it also means Tuesday afternoons are when you're most likely to be in back-to-back meetings, which is when you should not be trying to do deep work. So here's my system. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons are shallow work blocks. That's when I batch all my admin, emails, expense reports, scheduling, document reviews. I use AI to accelerate through it, but I'm not pretending these are deep work hours anyway. So you're working with your energy curve instead of against it. Afternoons are naturally lower energy. Tuesdays are naturally meeting heavy, so you're just leaning into that and using AI to make the shallow work less painful. Correct. And here's the specific workflow I use. 2 p.m., I open what I call my AI Command Center. It's just a document with prompts I've refined over time. First prompt, summarize these 12 email threads and identify which ones require my decision versus just my acknowledgement. Takes 30 seconds. Second prompt, draft responses to these 5 routine emails in my voice. I review and send, maybe 5 minutes total. Third prompt, extract action items from today's meeting notes and add them to my task list with priority levels. And you're getting that 33% productivity boost because you're not doing the cognitive grunt work. You're just making decisions and moving on. Right. But here's the key, and this is where I see people fail. You have to actually review what the AI produces. I'm not just hitting send on AI-generated emails. I'm editing them, adding personality, making sure they're accurate. The AI is doing the first draft, not the final product. Because otherwise, you fall into that motivation trap. You're not engaged, you're not learning, you're just a button pusher. Correct. And truthfully, some tasks I deliberately don't use AI for, even though I could. Like, I still write my own weekly team updates by hand. Not because it's more efficient, it's definitely not, but because it forces me to actually think about what happened that week and what matters. AI is a tool for reclaiming time and energy, not for eliminating all effort. You're using it strategically during your lowest energy hours to handle the stuff that has to get done, but doesn't require your best thinking.
Yes, and the batching piece is crucial. If you're using AI to respond to emails one at a time throughout the day, you're still context switching constantly. But if you batch all your email processing into one 30-minute AI-assisted block in the afternoon, that's when you see the real gains. Okay, so for someone listening who wants to implement this tomorrow, what's the minimum viable version? Tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., take all your unread emails and paste them into ChatGPT or Claude with this prompt. Categorize these emails by urgency and draft responses to any that are routine. Then review what it gives you, edit as needed, and send. Time yourself. I bet you'll cut your email processing time in half. And once you see that working, you can expand to other shallow work: meeting notes, document summaries, scheduling. The goal isn't to automate yourself out of a job. It's to automate the stuff that drains you so you have more energy for the stuff that matters. Which brings us to the end of the workday. Because if you've structured your day right, deep work in the morning, shallow work in the afternoon, you should actually have energy left when 5 p.m. rolls around. And that's where the real optimization happens.
All right, so we've optimized the entire workday, but here's where most people completely drop the ball. They just close their laptop and wonder why they're thinking about that unfinished presentation at 11 p.m. There's actually a neurological reason your brain won't let go of work, and it's called the Zeigarnik Effect.
Oh, this is one of my favorite pieces of research, because it explains so much about why we feel mentally exhausted even after leaving the office. The Zeigarnik Effect shows that our brains recall interrupted or unfinished tasks approximately 90% better than completed ones. 90%. Your brain is literally holding on to that incomplete task like it's a life or death situation.
Wait, 90% better recall? That's insane. So my brain is using precious cognitive resources to remember that I didn't finish updating the quarterly report, but I can't remember where I put my keys this morning?
Correct. It's because from an evolutionary perspective, unfinished tasks represented potential threats or missed opportunities. Your brain keeps them in active memory, constantly pinging you with reminders. The problem is, in our modern work environment, we have dozens of these open loops at any given time.
So how do we close these loops without actually finishing everything? Because let's be real, there's always more work to do.
This is where the research gets really practical. Studies show that simply creating a specific plan to resolve incomplete goals increases psychological detachment and reduces rumination. You don't have to finish the task. You just have to tell your brain when and how you're going to finish it.
I call this the plan to snooze hack. It's like hitting snooze on your brain's alarm system. You're not ignoring the task. You're just scheduling it for later in a way your brain accepts.
Perfect analogy. And I've developed a 15-minute shutdown ritual that leverages this mechanism. It's become non-negotiable for me because the difference in my evening mental clarity is dramatic.
Walk me through it. What happens in those 15 minutes?
Review, plan, and ritual phrase. First, I spend about 5 minutes reviewing what I accomplished today. Not what I didn't do, but what I actually completed. This gives my brain a sense of closure and progress.
That's smart. You're actively closing some of those cognitive loops by acknowledging completion.
Right. Then I spend about 8 minutes on the planning phase. I look at everything that's still open and I write down, and this is crucial, the specific next action for each item and when I'll do it. Not vague intentions like work on proposal, but concrete steps like Tuesday 9 a.m. draft executive summary section 45 minutes.
The specificity is what makes your brain accept it as a real plan rather than just wishful thinking.
Correct. Research shows that this kind of specific planning can free your subconscious from the cognitive tension of unfinished work. You're essentially telling your brain, I've got this handled, you can stop worrying about it now.
What about the ritual phrase? That sounds almost ceremonial.
It is, and that's the point. The last 2 minutes, I literally say out loud, work is complete for today. All open items are scheduled and will be addressed at their designated times. Then I close my notebook and shut down my computer in a specific sequence.
Some people might think that sounds a bit woo-woo, but I actually love this. You're creating a psychological boundary marker. Your brain learns to associate that phrase and sequence with the transition from work mode to personal time.
And the effects compound. After doing this consistently for about 2 weeks, I noticed my sleep quality improved significantly. I wasn't lying in bed mentally reviewing my task list anymore because my brain trusted that everything was captured and scheduled.
That's the real ROI here. Better sleep, which means better cognitive performance the next day, which means you're more efficient during work hours, which means less spillover into your evening. It's a positive feedback loop.
And here's what surprised me most. The 15 minutes feels like an investment, not a cost. I'm not rushing out the door anymore with this vague anxiety about what I'm forgetting. I'm leaving with clarity and confidence.
What about people who work in environments where they can't control their end time? Like they're in back-to-back meetings until 6 p.m. and then have to run to pick up their kids.
I'd argue they need this even more.
You can compress it to 5 minutes if necessary. The key is the consistency and the specificity. Even just taking 5 minutes in your car before driving home to write down your open loops and schedule them can make a massive difference. I've started doing a version of this, and one thing I've noticed is that it actually makes me more productive during the day. Because I know I have this shutdown ritual, I'm less tempted to work late or check email at night. The boundary becomes real.
That's the paradox of constraints. By creating a hard stop and a ritual around it, you actually increase your focus during work hours because you know there's a defined endpoint. So if someone's listening to this and wants to implement it tomorrow, what's the minimum viable version? Set a timer for 10 minutes before you want to stop working. Spend those 10 minutes writing down every open task, the specific next action for each one, and when you'll do it. Then say something like, "I'm done for today, everything is scheduled," and physically close your workspace. That's it.
And the key is treating it like an actual meeting with yourself. Non-negotiable, on your calendar, protected time, without question. Because what you're really doing is training your brain that work has boundaries, and those boundaries are trustworthy. Once your brain learns that pattern, the mental freedom you gain is incredible. You know what's compelling? We've spent this whole episode optimizing the workday itself. But this shutdown ritual might be the highest leverage intervention of all. Because if you can't mentally disconnect from work, none of the other optimizations matter. You're just going to burn out.
You know what strikes me most about this whole conversation? We started by moving a desk closer to a window, and we ended up building an entire operating system for sustainable performance. It's not about any single hack, it's about how these pieces fit together.
Correct. And the through line is really about working with your biology instead of against it. Whether it's light exposure in the morning, protecting your peak cognitive hours, or creating that psychological closure at the end of the day, it's all about alignment, not force.
So if someone's listening and thinking, "This sounds great, but I can't overhaul my entire day tomorrow," where would you start? Pick one boundary, just one. For most people, I'd say start with the shutdown ritual. 15 minutes at the end of your day to capture what's unfinished and plan tomorrow's top 3 priorities. That single intervention creates a compounding effect because it improves both your evening and your next morning.
I love that. And the second thing I'd add is protecting just one deep work block, even 90 minutes, where your phone is literally in another room and your communication apps are closed. Test it for a week and measure what you actually accomplish versus a normal day. The data will convince you faster than we ever could.
And here's the thing. Once you experience what it feels like to work with your natural rhythms instead of fighting them, you won't want to go back. It's not about grinding harder. It's about designing smarter.
Which means you actually get to leave work at work. You get your evenings back, you sleep better, and you show up sharper the next day. That's the real optimization. Not squeezing more hours out of your day, but getting more life out of your hours.
So here's your experiment for this week. Choose one element from today's conversation, implement it with specificity, exact times, concrete actions, and see what changes. Then let us know what you discover. We're always testing new protocols, and your results help us refine what actually works in the real world.
Until next time, optimize the system, not just the effort. We'll see you